Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. Man, I knew I should have just bought a new car from the dealer, but I was trying to save a few bucks. That's how I ended up browsing Craigslist for used cars instead of going to the professionals. I found this sweet 2006 Honda Accord for a price I couldn't pass up. The seller said it was in great condition despite the high mileage. I arranged to meet him at a grocery store parking lot so I could test drive it. The car looked nice enough when I checked it out. The interior was clean, and it drove smooth during my test drive. I didn't notice any major issues, so I decided to buy it. The seller seemed like a normal dude, nothing sketchy about him. We signed over the title and I handed him the cash. I was so excited to have my own set of wheels again. I hopped to the driver's seat and headed home. That's when things started getting weird. I heard a rattling sound coming from the dashboard. I pulled over to the side of the road to take a closer look, but couldn't find anything wrong. I popped the hood and inspected the engine. Oil looked good, no leaks or cracks that I could see. The noise had stopped, so I figured maybe something had just come loose and fell back into place. I kept driving. When I got home, I decided to do a more thorough inspection just to be safe. I popped the hood again and checked every inch of the engine components. The belt seemed snug, hoses were intact, fluids were topped off. I even poked around with a dipstick to see if anything felt off. Everything seemed perfectly normal. With the engine seeming okay, I moved to the interior. I opened the glove compartment to grab my insurance papers and immediately noticed it felt heavier and stiffer than usual when I pulled the handle. I tried closing and opening it a few times, and the resistance was definitely abnormal. I decided to investigate further. I removed all the contents and felt around the edges, squeezing and pressing along the seams. Behind the back panel, my fingers caught out a gap that shouldn't be there. Pushing on it revealed a hidden compartment built into the wall of the glove box. Strange, I thought. Why would a normal used car need a secret stash spot? My curiosity got the best of me, and I pried the hidden panel open with my fingers. Inside was a small Ziploc baggie filled with some kind of white powder. Seeing that immediately made my heart start pounding in my chest. Narcotics? Was this drugs? What did I get myself into? I slammed the glove compartment shut, as if hiding the bag from view could make it disappear. I sank back into the driver's seat, my mind racing. What was I going to do? Clearly, this car had been used for some illegal purpose if there were secret compartments to hide things. I tried to think back on the seller, but nothing seemed suspicious. He looked and acted like a normal guy, not some sketchy dealer. The more I thought about it, the more panicked I became. I didn't want anything to do with this or smuggling or criminal activity. But now I was sitting here with a hidden bag of white mystery powder. I quickly locked the car and went inside my house, feeling shaky with adrenaline. I paced around trying to figure out what to do next. Should I just ditch the car and deal with the lost money? Destroy the bag and its contents? I decided the only real option was to call the police. As nerve-wracking as that was, I didn't want to get in trouble for this mess. I dialed the cops and tried to explain the situation the best I could to the operator. The officer who showed up was very calm and professional about it. He collected the baggie as evidence and documented where exactly it had been hidden. He said they would send it to the lab for testing to identify the substance. He also took down all the information I had on the seller and details about the car itself. I felt overwhelmed, but also somewhat relieved to hand the situation over to the police. Surely I wasn't going to get in trouble for reporting a strange finding in my newly purchased used car. All I could do now was wait for that dreaded phone call about the test results, hoping desperately that it was somehow all a false alarm. I dreaded finding out the results. A few days later, they called to say the powder tested positive for narcotics. Great, the former owner was apparently a dealer and I had bought his old business vehicle. The cops said I wasn't in trouble since I reported it, but that the car could be confiscated if they tracked down the seller and build a drug case. For now, I was told to keep driving it as usual, but let me tell you, I was paranoid every time I sat in that driver's seat, wondering if the cops were following me or if the previous owner was coming after me. I kept checking my rear view mirror, expecting to see those flashing red and blue lights. It took me forever to relax enough to drive normally again. I decided to get the car cleaned out in case there was any more still lurking about. I didn't want to get charged with possession. The mechanic checked the whole thing thoroughly and found small hidden compartments throughout the car, behind the speakers, under the seats, even inside the lining of the trunk. This thing was a fully customized powder-hiding vehicle. No wonder the seller let it go so cheap. I ended up having to replace pretty much all the interior upholstery to feel safe driving my family around in it. I even had a sniffing dog come check it out, just to be 100% sure. They found nothing after the deep clean. Selling stuff on Craigslist can be hit or miss. You never know who you're gonna get as a buyer. I had an old 42-inch flat-screen TV I was trying to get rid of to make room in my apartment. Still worked perfectly fine. I had just upgraded to a bigger size. I figured I could make a quick buck and some lucky person would get a nice TV for cheap. I posted the ad and within a day got an email from a guy named Mark interested in taking it off my hands. He asked if he could come check it out that night and make sure it was in good condition. I said sure, gave him my address, and told him to come by around 8 p.m. after I was off work. Right off the bat when I opened the door, something seemed off about Mark. He was real fidgety, shifting his weight back and forth, and kept glancing around nervously instead of looking at the TV I was selling. I turned the TV on to demonstrate it was still in great working condition. The picture was clear, the colors vibrant. But Mark barely paid attention. He muttered, yeah, it's fine, but his eyes weren't focused on the screen at all. That's when I noticed him scanning his gaze all around my apartment, taking in every little detail. His eyes darted around, checking out the layout of my possessions, everything. It was like he was casing the place, not assessing a television for sale. I started feeling really weirded out by his behavior. Despite his lack of interest in the actual TV, Mark said he wanted to buy it when I gave the price. He pulled out a wad of cash from his pocket and counted out the bills. As he handed me the money, he got this really creepy little smile on his face. Then he said, "Nice place you got here all alone. Looks real. Cozy." Something about the way he said that last word sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't tell if he was trying to be flirty or subtly threaten me by emphasizing I lived alone. Either way, I felt unsafe. I kept the door propped open as he lugged the TV outside to his car. I was relieved when he drove off, hoping that would be the end of my interaction with Mark. But over the next couple of weeks, I realized how wrong I was. A few days later, as I was leaving my apartment, I thought I noticed his car slowly drive by down the street. It was hard to tell for sure from a distance, but it looked very similar. A week after that, I distinctly remember seeing Mark himself sitting in his parked car just down the block from my building. When he noticed me walking by, he suddenly ducked his head down like he didn't want to be spotted. My unease continued to grow with each of these strange sightings. I didn't know what to do. I had no solid proof he was stalking me, just this creeping feeling that he seemed to be lurking around my neighborhood. That night, I was home alone and thought I heard the patio door handle jiggling a bit, the one that leads up to the back alley. It could have just been the wind, but combined with the eerie events of earlier that day, it really freaked me out. I lay awake in bed for hours listening intently for any more sounds, worried that someone could be trying to break in. Every little creak of the building made me imagine an intruder lurking right outside my bedroom. I barely slept a wink thinking about Mark and wondering if he had been the one testing my door handle that night. The weirdest part was I started noticing things moved around my apartment ever so slightly. A picture frame tilted, a cabinet door left ajar, my closet contents shuffled around. It was tiny changes, but enough to make me feel violated, like someone had been snooping. I knew I had to get proof Mark was harassing me so I could call the police. I installed security cameras outside my front door. Sure enough, a few days later the footage showed him snooping around my building, checking door handles. He had a keychain with multiple keys on it that he seemed to be testing out. I checked the date the footage was from and remembered it was the night I thought I heard someone at my patio. The cameras didn't cover the back, so he must have been trying to get in that way. I felt sick watching him creep around my home. This psycho was trying to break in. I brought the footage to the police and they paid Mark a visit, warning him to stay away. I also got extra locks installed, motion detector lights, the works. I was rattled to my core knowing someone had been inside my place while I was sleeping and could have easily hurt me. A couple weeks went by with no sign of Mark. I started to feel safe again. But walking to my car after work one night, I noticed the back window busted in. Nothing was stolen, but there was a photo of Ely on the passenger seat. Handwritten on the back was a message saying, "You look so peaceful when you sleep." I nearly vomited in fear. This maniac had been inside my apartment watching me. He was escalating his harassment. I filed another report and stayed at a friend's place while they investigated. Turns out Mark had a record of stalking and breaking and entering. He was arrested soon after. I had to move because I never felt safe in that apartment again, always imagining him invading my most private moments. Now I'm much more cautious when I sell anything online. You really don't know who you're dealing with. I learned the hard way when I let a predator into my home. Screening buyers carefully could save my life. I feel so violated knowing someone was obsessed with me to the point of breaking in just to be close to me. The worst horror stories come from real life, not the movies. I've always loved vintage items and antiquing. So when I came across a Craigslist ad for an original 1960s oil painting going for an absurdly cheap price, I couldn't resist. The seller didn't provide any info about the artist or history, but the thumbnail image radiated a cool retro vibe that appealed to my love of mid-century modern aesthetics. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown. I arrived early and grabbed a table while sipping on an iced latte. Right on time, a man in his 40s approached with a large, square canvas carefully wrapped in brown paper. He peeled back the packaging so I could inspect the artwork. Up close, I could see the painting was an abstract nightscape. Dark swirls of deepest navy blue blended with inky black shadows, accented by specks of silver and white paint that gave the impression of a night sky glimmering with stars. There was a hypnotic, swirling movement to the broad brushstrokes that created a feeling of sinking into an endless abyss. I sat transfixed, studying the textures and tones while the seller shifted impatiently, interrupting my art reverie to remind me of his limited time. I quickly paid him the full $50 asking price, not even trying to negotiate a lower amount. This painting spoke to my soul for reasons I couldn't articulate. I just knew I must have it. At home, I carefully positioned the painting on the wall directly across from my bed, so it would be the last thing I see before I drift off to sleep each night, and the first thing I see upon waking each morning. That first night that I settled under my covers, I gazed at those swirling midnight blues and shivering silvers, feeling pleased with how this unique piece lit up my bedroom. I fell asleep with a contented smile, its hypnotic abstract shapes dancing by in my eyelids. What followed over the next week were the most vividly terrifying nightmares I've ever experienced in my life. Dreams of icy darkness swirling around me, enfolding my body in its frigid tendrils and pulling me down into a vast, lightless abyss. I find myself struggling to swim upward, fighting against the strong downward pull, but shadowy bands wrap tight around my limbs like black quicksand, anchoring me firmly in place no matter how fiercely I thrashed and struggled. An overwhelming sense of suffocating oblivion consumed me as I sank further into that bottomless void. A bone-chilling cold seeped into every cell of my being. Just as my lungs were about to burst, I'd abruptly find myself awake in bed, heart hammering in sheets, soaked with sweat as I gasped desperately for air. It took long minutes of reality checking and deep breathing to convince myself I was safe in the comfort of my own bed, not trapped in some eternal frozen underworld. But no matter how exhausting those nightly bouts were, I could never resist the pull of sleep for long. I quickly collapsed back into slumber, only to plunge right back into the same sequence of unnerving darkness. This cycle continued night after night for over a week straight. I was like a zombie during work, chugging cup after cup of coffee, struggling to keep my head up and eyes open as I yawned uncontrollably. My coworkers asked if I was feeling all right because of the dark circles under my eyes and my dazed, sluggish demeanor. But I couldn't properly explain or understand it myself. Why had my dreams suddenly become populated with such intensely enveloping sensations of horror night after night? I used to have normal, random dreams like anyone else. Now it was the same exact vision repeating on a loop, sinking into freezing black waters, strangling darkness wrapping me in its clutches, unable to escape no matter how I fought in those dreams. I became obsessed with figuring out what had triggered this unceasing onslaught of shadowy, icy nightmares. There had to be an explanation for why peaceful rest had been stolen from me and replaced with such vividly chilling visions. I just had to unravel this mystery before I lost my grip on reality entirely. It wasn't until I started paying closer attention to the painting while lying in bed that an idea took shape. Its abyssal qualities seemed more pronounced in the darkness. The wispy shadows almost appeared to writhe and curl inward. I realized the twisted nightly vision started the very first night this artwork came home with me. I decided to test my theory and moved the painting to the living room for a few days. Immediately, restful sleep returned. My dreams went back to their normal randomness. I felt rejuvenated without that air of brooding darkness invading my slumber. But distrust of the object took root. I started noticing optical illusions during the day that made the painting seem to move out of the corner of my eye. The shadows appeared layered and shifting in ways that almost hurt to look at directly. At night, gazing at it bathed in moonlight and shadows caused my heart rate to spike with primal fear for no logical reason. I became convinced this artwork was cursed or possessed in some way. The longer I had it, the more strongly I felt malicious psychic energy radiating from it. I couldn't stand to have it in my home one more night. On my way home from work, I stopped at a shady underpass known for illegal dumping. And without ceremony, I hurled the painting into the darkness of a roadside dumpster. The relief I felt driving home was palpable. I didn't care about the money I wasted. I just wanted that conduit of evil dreams as far from me as possible. That night, I enjoyed the first nightmare-free sleep I'd gotten in weeks. Whatever malevolent entity was attached to that painting could haunt someone else now. I was finally free from its sinister grip on my unconscious mind. I'll definitely think twice in the future before bringing home used vintage art from sketchy sources. There are some energies you don't want to invite past your front door, no matter how temptingly cool they may appear. As for my bedroom, I'll stick with posters of kittens and meadows to stimulate sweet dreams from now on. Losing my office job was one of the hardest things I've gone through. The unemployment checks barely covered rent and groceries each month. So when I saw an ad on Craigslist for a career position that claimed to pay $100 cash per delivery with flexible hours, I jumped at the opportunity. The company name was something vague like Rapid Careers Limited, but the ad said all I needed was my own reliable vehicle to make drops around the city. It seemed like easy money that would keep me afloat while I continued my job search. I sent an email expressing my interest and quickly received a reply from someone named Victor asking me to come by a warehouse downtown the following afternoon for an interview. I probably should have realized something was off when I pulled into a dingy back alley behind the address Victor had given. The warehouse looked completely abandoned, with the windows blacked out. I considered just driving away, but suddenly a large overhead door rattled open and there stood Victor waving me inside. He was a muscular, tattooed guy in a black shirt who seemed annoyed, telling me to hurry up as he looked around outside cautiously. The warehouse interior was just empty loading bays, nothing else. Victor led me back to a grimy office area and began explaining the job in a hushed tone. He said he contracts independent couriers to make discreet deliveries to clients around the city. The packages contained documents, flash drives, or other small sensitive items. I would get paid $500 per successful drop, no questions asked. Despite my unease, I agreed to give it a try, telling myself the pay was too good to pass up. Victor emphasized the need for absolute discretion, saying clients expected total privacy and I should simply focus on quickly transporting packages from point A to B without looking inside. He had me sign some non-disclosure forms and said he'd be in touch with my first assignment. The first couple packages were innocuous cardboard boxes that didn't seem suspicious. I'd leave my unlocked car at a parking garage, then return hours later to find a package on the front seat along with an address written on an envelope. I dropped the box on their doorstep, text Victor that it was done, then later find an envelope of cash back in my car's payment. After a few easy runs like that, the packages started getting suspiciously heavier, like they contained something made of metal or tech parts. The drop locations also got shadier, behind commercial buildings or in public trash cans instead of residences. I contemplated backing out, but needed the money and didn't want to risk Victor's wrath. Things reached a breaking point a couple weeks into working for Victor. As usual, I pulled into the parking garage and left my car unlocked with the keys hidden inside. When I returned later, there was a medium-sized box sitting on the passenger seat along with an address scribbled on a piece of paper. The box felt dense and heavy in my hands as I went to move it to the back seat, but just as I lifted it up, I noticed the lid was slightly ajar on one side. The tape sealing it closed must have come loose. Before I could think better of it, I peeked inside and glimpsed the unmistakable metal barrel of a handgun nestled in packing paper. I nearly dropped the box, my hands starting to tremble. This was no harmless documents or flash drive. I was delivering untraceable firearms. Suddenly, the gravity of my involvement in Victor's shady operation hit me all at once. Who knew how many illegal weapons I had already transported in those innocuous-looking boxes? My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do next. I couldn't just continue on and make this delivery now that I knew the deadly contents. But I was terrified of outright confronting Victor and telling him I refused to work for him anymore. He did not seem like the kind of man who would let me simply walk away after seeing too much. I drove around aimlessly for hours in case I was being watched or followed, my paranoia spiraling. I finally felt safer returning home with all the lights on, but I knew my involvement in Victor's dangerous scheme wasn't over yet. For weeks, I was consumed with anxiety that Victor would retaliate against me for abandoning the gun delivery. Though he never had my address or full name, I worried he had ways of tracking me down. I constantly checked the locks and glanced out the windows at any noise, terrified he would show up seeking violent retribution. So when an unexpected knock came at my apartment door late one night, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I apprehensively looked through the peephole to see 2 uniformed police officers. I hesitated to open the door, but they persisted, saying they needed to speak with me. I slowly cracked the door, my mouth going dry when one officer rested his hand on his holstered gun. But they quickly reassured me they were here about the illegal weapons shipment I had ditched, which had allowed them to build a case against Victor's trafficking ring thanks to an anonymous tip on the gun's location. I sagged against the door in relief as the whole story spilled out. The officers took my statement and said I wasn't in any legal trouble for aiding their investigation by backing out when I realized Victor's criminality. After months of fearing for my safety, I finally felt free knowing those dangerous men were off the streets. I decided to stick to basic job sites from then on. No more risky Craigslist gigs ever again.
Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.